Welcome to Willow Creek Estates. Sarah hummed along to the faint bluegrass emanating from her earbuds as she edged the walkway with meticulous precision. The sun, already high for 7 a.m., beat down on her neck, but she barely noticed. This was her meditation, her therapy, her weekly communion with the earth. Each clean slice of the edger, each blade of grass perfectly aligned, was a small victory against the chaos of the world. She'd spent weeks coaxing the fescue into its current state of emerald glory. It wasn't just a lawn, it was a testament to her dedication. She'd even programmed her irrigation system with soil moisture sensors and weather forecasts, ensuring optimal hydration without a drop wasted. It was a point of pride, especially in drought-prone California. She glanced at the vibrant blooms of her drought-resistant flower beds, a riot of color against the green. Everything had its place, everything thrived. A shadow fell across her meticulously manicured lawn. Sarah sighed, already knowing who it was. She plucked out her earbuds and straightened, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Carol Vandergelt, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, stood on the sidewalk, her lips pursed like a prune. Carol's perfectly coiffed blonde hair shone under the harsh sunlight, and her designer sunglasses perched precariously on her nose. "Morning, Carol," Sarah said, trying to keep her tone neutral. Carol didn't return the greeting. Her gaze swept over Sarah's lawn, missing nothing. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "I'm afraid I have some concerns." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Concerns?" "Yes. Several, actually." Carol pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward a small section of Sarah's flower bed where a few errant petunias had dared to droop slightly. "These petunias appear to be flagging. The HOA guidelines clearly state that all landscaping must be maintained in pristine condition." Sarah bit back a retort. "They're fine, Carol. They just need a little water. It's going to be almost 90 degrees today." Carol ignored her. "And this," she continued, gesturing to the edge of the lawn closest to the street. "The grass here appears to be slightly longer than the mandated 2 inches. I measured it myself." She produced a small, foldable ruler from her designer handbag, snapping it open with a flourish. Sarah's jaw clenched. 2 inches. She was being ridiculous. "Carol, it's barely longer. Maybe a quarter of an inch, if that." "Rules are rules, Sarah. We must maintain uniformity within the community. Otherwise, property values will plummet." Carol's voice dripped with condescension. "Property values?" Sarah repeated, incredulous. "I'm pretty sure my drought-resistant landscaping and perfectly healthy lawn are increasing property values. Unlike some of the brown patches I've seen elsewhere." She couldn't resist the jab. Carol's face flushed a shade of pink that clashed horribly with her lipstick. "That is beside the point. And completely irrelevant. The irrigation schedule for the entire community is available on the HOA website. Following it will ensure your lawn receives adequate water. Uniformity, Sarah, remember. I have my own irrigation system, Carol. It's more efficient and uses less water than the community schedule. I'm being environmentally responsible." Sarah crossed her arms, refusing to back down. Carol's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "That may be so, but it's not approved. Any modifications to landscaping or watering schedules must be submitted to the HOA Architectural Committee for review and approval." "You haven't submitted anything, have you?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, I haven't." "I thought not." Carol's lips curled into a smug smile. "I'll need you to rectify these issues immediately, Sarah. And please submit the appropriate paperwork for your irrigation system modification. Failure to comply will result in fines." With that, Carol turned on her heel and marched off, leaving Sarah standing on her perfectly edged lawn, simmering with frustration. The bluegrass on her earbuds suddenly sounded jarring and aggressive. She ripped them out, tossing them onto the lawn chair. Uniformity. That was all Carol Vandergelt cared about. And control. Sarah picked up her edger, the metallic tang of gasoline filling her nostrils. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The case of the vanishing water. The water bill sat on the kitchen counter, mocking Sarah. Usually a manageable $40, this month screamed $180 in bold, black numbers. Sarah reread it, convinced there had to be a mistake. She hadn't watered the garden more than usual, hadn't had any house guests running extra showers. This was absurd. A knot tightened in her stomach. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the water company's website, comparing the current usage to previous months. The graph looked like a gentle slope until mid-June, then it shot straight up like a rocket. Something was definitely wrong. Her first thought was a leak. The most likely culprit? The sprinkler system. Grabbing her tools, Sarah headed out to the yard. The sun beat down, turning the grass a vibrant green. She methodically checked each sprinkler head, twisting and turning them, looking for cracks or drips. Nothing. The underground pipes were next. She walked the perimeter, listening for the telltale hiss of escaping water. Silence. Frustration mounted. She knelt, running her hand over the damp earth near the flower beds. The soil was moist, but not unusually so. She even dug a little, searching for a soggy patch that might indicate a hidden leak. Still nothing. Everything all right, Sarah? Mrs. Davison, her neighbor from across the street, was watering her petunias. Sarah stood, wiping dirt from her hands onto her jeans. Just trying to figure out this ridiculous water bill. It's 4 times what it usually is. Mrs. Davison clicked her tongue. Oh dear. Leaks can be sneaky things. I've checked everything. Sprinklers, pipes, even the toilets. I can't find a thing. Mrs. Davison glanced over at Carol's immaculate lawn. Well, you know, some people are very thrifty. They try to save every penny they can. She paused, a knowing look in her eyes. Especially when it comes to things like water. Sarah frowned. Thrifty? What do you mean? Mrs. Davison shrugged, feigning innocence. Oh, nothing. Just that some people believe in conserving resources, by any means necessary. She winked, then turned back to her petunias. Well, good luck with that bill. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Sarah watched her walk away, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Carol? Stealing her water? It seemed far-fetched, even for Carol. But Mrs. Davison's pointed look and vague words had planted a seed of suspicion. Back inside, Sarah grabbed a glass of iced tea. Carol was meticulous about her lawn. It was always perfectly manicured, an unnatural shade of green. And now that she thought about it, Carol's sprinklers always seemed to be running at odd hours, even during the day when watering was discouraged by the HOA. Sarah stared out the window at Carol's pristine lawn. It was a long shot, but something didn't feel right. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. If Carol was stealing her water, she wouldn't let her get away with it. Night watch. The moon, a meager crescent in the indigo expanse, offered scant light to the hydrangea bordering Sarah's yard. Armed with a rock cam, a slapdash spy gadget born of a frustrating afternoon wrangling with Carol Vandergelt, Sarah hunkered down at her vigil. The folding chair, purloined from her camping gear, stabbed at her lumbar region, but she ignored the discomfort. Tonight, she was the hunter. She'd strategically positioned herself amidst the rose bushes lining their shared boundary, their thorny embrace a natural camouflage. The camera, nestled amongst the fragrant blooms nearest the tap, was primed. Its infrared eye would capture everything, regardless of the gloom. Long hours seeped away. Crickets sawed their endless song, underlined by the distant whoosh of traffic. Fighting the encroaching drowsiness, Sarah nursed tepid coffee from her flask. Doubt, a persistent weed, sprouted in her mind. Was she tilting at windmills? Wasting precious hours? Perhaps Carol was simply an officious busybody, not a pilferer of precious resources. Then, a subtle shift in the shadows. A figure peeled away from the darkness engulfing Carol's property. Sarah's breath hitched, her pulse quickened. The figure's lithe movements seemed incongruous with the meticulously sculpted image of the HOA president. As it edged closer, the faint moonlight grazed the severe planes of Carol's face. Confirmed. Carol worked with a practiced ease that suggested repeated performance. She clutched a coiled length of garden hose, its verdant shade a stark contrast against the pale flagstones of Sarah's patio. Silently, she stalked to the spigot. Sarah's anger began to seethe. She observed as Carol knelt, a slender beam of light slicing the darkness as she worked. The hose clicked into place, a soft, insidious sound. A second later, the telltale whisper of escaping water filled the night air. Carol didn't pause to check the pressure, nor consider Sarah's garden's needs. Instead, she hauled the hose back toward her own domain, dissolving back into the night's embrace. A stray arc of water caught the moonlight, a glittering bridge thrown across the property divide. Vindication surged through Sarah, a jolt of pure electricity. Her instincts hadn't been wrong. Carol Vandergelt, arbiter of lawn aesthetics and architectural hues, was brazenly siphoning her water. The gall of it was truly impressive. She remained motionless, observing as Carol methodically quenched the thirst of her prize-winning roses, blossoms Sarah had eyed with a flicker of envy just days before. The gentle susurrus of the water seemed to taunt her. Let her revel in her ill-gotten moisture. Sarah now possessed irrefutable evidence. She had a plan coalescing. And by the light of the next sunrise, Carol Vandergelt would face a rude reckoning. The crickets continued their serenade, unaware of the clandestine conflict simmering in this placid suburb. The night held more than just shadows, it held promise. Confrontation at dawn. A faint roseate hue kissed the horizon as Sarah stalked across the impeccably kept lawn separating her property from Carol Vandergelt's. Morning dew, a glittering film on the grass, seeped into her worn gardening clogs, a discomfort she ignored completely. A hard, icy knot of anger propelled her. Carol's prize-winning roses, glistening jewels from the night's moisture, seemed to judge her from their perches. As Sarah neared the Vandergelt's flawless white porch, Carol materialized, trowel gripped in her hand, an embodiment of suburban serenity in floral gloves and wide-brimmed sun hat. Carol, Sarah began, the word edged with more steel than she'd intended. Carol flinched, her blue eyes widening slightly behind the shield of her sunglasses. Sarah. Goodness. You're up with the birds. We need to discuss the water situation, Sarah declared, bypassing any chit-chat. Carol's smile flickered, a brief eclipse, but Sarah caught it. Water? I'm not sure I follow, she responded, her tone carefully balanced. My latest bill was astronomical. I haven't altered my usage at all. The only logical conclusion is someone's tapping into my supply. Sarah let the accusation simmer. Carol emitted a light, airy laugh, a sound that scraped against Sarah's raw nerves. Sarah, darling, that's preposterous. Why would I pilfer your water? With a flourish, she indicated her own well-watered landscape with her trowel. I have a state-of-the-art irrigation system. The best money can buy, really. How peculiar, considering I observed a leak near the... Sarah paused, then plunged ahead. Near the spigot connected to my line. The one you've been surreptitiously using. Carol's face tightened, the veneer of amiability cracking like sun-baked clay. That's a very serious allegation, Sarah. And one I take offense to. I sit on the HOA board, you know. We frown on these kinds of accusations. And I frown on having my utilities poached, Sarah shot back, her voice equally frigid. I have demonstrable evidence, Carol. It isn't simply a suspicion. Carol straightened, her eyes mere slits behind her shades. Evidence? Please, enlighten me. I think you're letting your imagination run amok, dear. I installed a flow meter. I have precise records of when and how much water vanished. The data corresponds perfectly with your garden's watering schedule. And also, incidentally, with the moments the hose is in use. Carol's manicured hand tightened around the trowel. The air thickened with unspoken menace. This is absurd, she spat out. I will not be subjected to water theft accusations. Frivolous accusations like this border on harassment. I could very well report you to the HOA for that, too. Sarah stood firm, refusing to cower. Report away. But perhaps consider the penalties you could incur when I present my findings to the HOA. They take water conservation seriously. Particularly during a drought. Carol's lips compressed into a bloodless line. You fancy yourself clever, don't you, Sarah? Let me assure you, I've resided in this neighborhood for 2 decades. I understand the dynamics here. I know the right people. You're the new girl. The outsider. You don't belong. And I intend to make your life here thoroughly disagreeable. She punctuated her threat with a vicious stab of the trowel into the flower bed. Consider this fair warning. Operation Mudslide. Sarah slammed her laptop shut, the metallic thud echoing in the otherwise quiet apartment. Carol's smug face, forever imprinted in her memory from the HOA meeting, flashed before her eyes. The injustice of it all, Carol's casual dismissal of Sarah's water bill complaints and the HOA's subsequent shoulder-shrugging, had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. Fine. If they wanted to play dirty, Sarah could play dirtier. Literally. Operation Mudslide was a go. The first order of business was research. Hours were spent poring over articles about non-toxic mud recipes. She needed something thick, clinging, and gloriously messy, but absolutely harmless to Carol's precious petunias. The internet, as always, provided a wealth of information. Bentonite clay seemed like a promising base, mixed with composted leaves for that extra earthy aroma. A little bit of food coloring, maybe a touch of brown and green, would ensure a truly repugnant hue. Next came the delivery system. A simple sprinkler system, as she'd originally intended, wouldn't cut it. This required precision, a targeted assault. She needed something that could launch mud with focused intensity. Sarah spent a good hour sketching designs on a notepad, a modified leaf blower. Too messy, too unpredictable. A high-powered water gun. Interesting, but lacking the necessary oomph. Finally, she settled on a modified garden sprayer, the kind used for pesticides, but thoroughly cleaned, of course. She'd need to widen the nozzle to accommodate the thicker mud concoction. A grin spread across Sarah's face. It was all coming together. The next morning, armed with a carefully crafted shopping list, Sarah ventured out. The garden center was a symphony of earthy smells and vibrant colors. She located the bentonite clay, discreetly purchased a bag of composted leaves, and then, feeling slightly ridiculous, picked out a small bottle of brown food coloring. She imagined the cashier's bemused expression if they knew what she was planning. Next stop, the hardware store. Sarah navigated the aisles with purpose, grabbing a heavy-duty garden sprayer, extra tubing, and an assortment of nozzle attachments. The wider the better, she thought, visualizing the glorious mud spray arc. She even picked up a pair of heavy-duty gloves, because even she wasn't thrilled about getting elbow-deep in mud. Back at her apartment, Sarah laid out her supplies on the kitchen table, transforming her usually pristine space into a mad scientist's laboratory. She felt a thrill course through her. This wasn't just about water anymore, it was about standing up for herself, about not being pushed around by entitled neighbors. This was about reclaiming her peace of mind. The first batch of mud was surprisingly satisfying to mix. The clay thickened with the water, the compost adding a delightfully pungent aroma, and the food coloring transforming the mixture into a truly revolting shade of swampy brown. She loaded the mixture into the garden sprayer, tested the nozzle, and watched with glee as a thick stream of mud shot across her kitchen, splattering against the far wall. Okay, maybe a little too powerful. She'd need to adjust the pressure. But for now, Operation Mudslide was officially in motion. Carol wouldn't know what hit her. Engineering mayhem. The moon was a sliver in the inky sky, barely illuminating Sarah's hands as she wrestled with the stubborn sprinkler head. The cool night air nipped at her exposed skin, but she was too focused to notice. A swarm of mosquitoes buzzed a relentless tune around her head, but she swatted them away absently, her concentration unbroken. This wasn't just about fixing a broken sprinkler, it was about poetic justice, served cold and muddy. She'd spent the afternoon sourcing the right kind of pump, one powerful enough to handle the viscous slurry she planned to unleash. The local hardware store owner had given her a knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of neighborhood disputes and the lengths people would go to settle them. Now, crouched in the damp grass, the pump was humming softly, connected to a network of hoses she'd carefully buried earlier that day. The hardest part had been diverting the water source. She couldn't risk tampering with the main line, that would be too obvious. Instead, she'd tapped into the smaller irrigation pipe feeding her flower beds, a risky maneuver but one that offered the element of surprise. If Karen was expecting an attack, it would be from the main sprinklers, not the delicate petunias. Sweat beaded on Sarah's forehead as she tightened the clamp. The mud mixture, a concoction of clay, topsoil, and just enough water to make it flow, sat in a large, camouflaged container near the shed. She'd tested the consistency multiple times, ensuring it wouldn't clog the system but would still deliver a satisfyingly thick coating. Next came the switch. Sarah had salvaged an old doorbell button and wired it to a small relay. She mounted the button inside a hollowed-out rock near the patio, disguised amongst the other decorative stones. A nearly invisible wire snaked its way to the pump relay, ready to trigger the muddy deluge with a simple press. She checked her watch. Almost 2 a.m. Time for the test run. Sarah carefully positioned herself near the rock, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the button. A low groan emanated from the pump, followed by a gurgling sound from the sprinkler heads closest to the property line. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sputtering hiss, a geyser of thick, brown mud erupted into the night. It arced through the air, landing with a satisfying splat on the manicured lawn and, she hoped, on something far more deserving. Sarah grinned, a primal satisfaction surging through her. The pressure was perfect, the spray radius even better than she'd anticipated. She watched as the mud rained down, a chocolate-colored baptism for the perfectly green grass. After a minute, she released the button. The pump died with a soft whimper. The air hung heavy with the earthy scent of wet soil. She surveyed her handiwork, a twisted sense of accomplishment blooming in her chest. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't subtle, but it was effective. And tomorrow, Karen would have a very rude awakening. As she began to gather her tools, a twig snapped nearby. Sarah froze, her senses on high alert. She scanned the darkness, but saw nothing. Must be an animal, she reasoned, or maybe just the wind. Still, a prickle of unease ran down her spine. She quickly packed everything away, erasing any trace of her nocturnal activities. As she slipped back inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. caught in the act. Sarah chewed on her thumbnail, eyes glued to the grainy footage on her laptop. The image, transmitted from the strategically placed, weatherproof camera nestled amongst her prize-winning petunias, showed precisely nothing. Just her overgrown lawn, shimmering slightly in the heat haze. Frustration gnawed at her. She'd been checking the feed every hour since setting up the camera, sacrificing sleep and productivity for the sake of catching her sneaky neighbor. She almost wished Carol Vandergelt would show up, just to put an end to this agonizing waiting game. Suddenly, a shadow stretched across the lawn. Sarah straightened, her heart hammering against her ribs. There she was. Carol, clad in a ridiculously oversized sun hat and floral dress, tiptoed across the grass like a heron stalking its prey. She carried her telltale green hose, the one that snaked its way across the property line under cover of darkness. Sarah watched, a cold fury bubbling inside her, as Carol expertly connected the hose to Sarah's spigot. The audacity. The sheer, unadulterated gall. Sarah resisted the urge to run outside and confront her. No. She'd waited this long, she could wait a few more seconds. Justice, she decided, was best served, muddy. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, activating the modified sprinkler system she'd spent the better part of yesterday rigging up. It was a messy concoction, involving a submersible pump, a hefty supply of clay-rich soil from the back 40, and a whole lot of duct tape. But it was going to be glorious. On the screen, Carol straightened, a smug expression plastered on her face. She turned the spigot, her shoulders relaxing as she watched the water begin to flow. Probably picturing her perfectly manicured lawn drinking deeply, Sarah thought with a grim satisfaction. Then it happened. With a low whir, the sprinklers sputtered to life, not with the gentle spray of water Carol expected, but with a thick, brown slurry that arced through the air like miniature mud volcanoes. The first wave hit Carol square in the chest, splattering her floral dress with muddy polka dots. She yelped, a high-pitched shriek that even the camera's mediocre microphone picked up clearly. The sprinklers, now fully engaged, rotated with gusto, coating Carol in a thick, clinging layer of mud. It plastered her sun hat to her head, streamed down her face, and turned her pristine white sandals into muddy clogs. Sarah watched, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. The image on the screen was chaotic, almost comical. Carol, flailing and sputtering, looked like a swamp monster emerging from the depths. She tried to disconnect the hose, but her muddy hands slipped on the metal. Another wave of mud engulfed her. Finally, she managed to wrench the hose free, dropping it in the mud with a disgusted squelch. She stood there for a moment, chest heaving, a statue carved from mud and outrage. Then, with a furious glare in the general direction of Sarah's house, she turned and stomped away, leaving a trail of muddy footprints in her wake. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a sigh of pure satisfaction escaping her lips. She saved the video file, labeling it with a flourish, Operation Mudslide, Success. The evidence was irrefutable. She knew this wasn't the end. Carol Vandergelt wasn't one to back down easily. But for now, at least, Sarah had won. And the image of Carol, covered head to toe in mud, was going to keep her smiling for days. Muddy confessions. The phone buzzed in Sarah's grip. She hit play. The shaky video revealed a figure blundering through the gloom toward her backyard. Then, whoosh. A geyser of viscous, earthy slurry erupted, drenching the intruder from head to toe. The figure, unmistakably Carol Vandergelt, emitted a shriek that even the phone's tiny speaker amplified with excruciating clarity. Sarah presented the phone to Carol, who stood on her usually immaculate lawn, a showcase of suburban perfection now marred by dripping mud. Carol herself looked like something dredged from a peat bog. Familiar face? Sarah inquired, her voice a surprisingly even counterpoint to the fury simmering within. Carol's features twisted. Mud plastered her lashes, blurring her already incensed stare. "This is manipulated." "That's not me," she protested, fruitlessly attempting to wipe the grime off her designer frock. Brown tracks decorated the expensive fabric. "Oh, is it? Funny, because I distinctly recall setting up the camera. And wouldn't you know, the timestamp coincides perfectly with the inexplicable surge in my water consumption. Remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you agree?" Sarah gestured toward the suspiciously lush rose bushes Carol had been tending when the watery trap was sprung. "Those roses are thriving a little too well given the water restrictions, Carol." Carol folded her arms, a gesture that only served to smear further muck onto her pristine white cardigan. "I haven't the faintest idea what you're implying. I was merely appreciating your landscaping." Sarah raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Appreciating it at 3 in the morning with a garden hose? Give me a break, Carol. You're not fooling anyone, especially not with half my garden presently adorning you." The silence hung, thick and cloying as the mud clinging to Carol's scalp. A robin perched on a nearby feeder, chirping merrily, oblivious to the drama playing out below. Finally, the fight seemed to seep from Carol. Her shoulders sagged. "Fine," she mumbled, the word almost lost in the air. Perhaps I borrowed a little water. Just a smidge." "A smidge? My water bill doubled, Carol." "That's not a smidge, that's grand larceny." Sarah advanced a step. "You've been pilfering my water supply for months, haven't you? All to keep your prize-winning roses blooming while the rest of us conserve." Carol avoided Sarah's gaze, her attention fixed on the muddy puddles pooling around her Jimmy Choos. I required it. The roses were failing. And I'm on the garden club board. It would have been mortifying." Sarah scoffed. "Mortifying? Try explaining this to the garden club." She indicated Carol's mud-encrusted state. "Or should I simply forward them the incriminating video?" The blood drained from Carol's complexion. "No. Please, I beg you, don't. My reputation." "Your reputation? You're concerned about your reputation after stealing from your neighbor?" Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "This isn't merely about the water, Carol. It's about ethics. It's about believing you're somehow exempt from the rules." Carol exhaled, a deflated sigh. Okay. What is it you want?" "I want restitution for the misappropriated water. Every last drop. I have the invoices. Payment in full by week's end. And a formal apology at the next HOA meeting." Carol's eyes widened in alarm. "A formal apology? Before everyone?" "Precisely. Everyone deserves to know that not even the HOA president is above reproach." Sarah stood firm, her gaze unwavering as granite. Carol wavered, then nodded with agonizing slowness. "Fine. I'll cover the costs. And I'll apologize." She looked utterly vanquished, a mud-caked monarch deposed. Sarah permitted herself a small, satisfied smile. "Excellent. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a garden to reclaim." She pivoted and headed back toward her house, leaving Carol marooned on her lawn, a grimy testament to her own hubris. The robin chirped again, sounding almost like a mocking peal of laughter. The fall of the HOA Karen. Sarah walked into the HOA meeting room, the air thick with anticipation. Carol Vandergelt sat at the head of the long, polished table, radiating her usual self-important aura. A smug smile played on her lips. She clearly believed she still held all the cards. Sarah clutched the USB drive in her hand. It felt like a small, insignificant object, yet it held the power to dismantle Carol's carefully constructed facade. "All right, let's get this over with," Carol announced, her voice dripping with impatience. "Sarah, I assume you have some concerns about the water bill?" Sarah stepped forward, placing the USB drive on the table. "Concerns is an understatement, Carol. I have proof of theft." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Carol's smile faltered, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Theft? Absurd. I demand you retract that statement," Carol sputtered, her voice rising in pitch. "I'll do better than retract it," Sarah said, her voice steady and firm. "I'll show you." She addressed the other board members, bypassing Carol entirely. "I've been investigating the unusually high water bills at my property. What I found was disturbing." Sarah worked quickly, connecting her laptop to the room's projector. The screen flickered to life, displaying a time-stamped video feed of her backyard. A hush fell over the room. The video played, showing Carol Vandergelt, in her floral gardening gloves, sneaking onto Sarah's property late at night. The camera zoomed in as Carol attached a hose to Sarah's sprinkler system, diverting water to her own parched lawn. The video repeated, each time showing Carol's clandestine watering sessions, the evidence undeniable. The mud sprinkler incident was not shown. Murmurs erupted in the room. Faces contorted in disbelief, disgust, and anger. Even the most loyal of Carol's supporters looked shocked. This is outrageous," exclaimed Mr. Henderson, the normally mild-mannered treasurer, his face flushed crimson. Mrs. Davies, the board secretary, gasped. "Carol, how could you?" Carol, her face now a mask of fury and humiliation, tried to regain control. "This is a fabrication. A complete and utter lie." "The timestamps don't lie, Carol," Sarah countered, her voice calm but unwavering. "Neither do the water bills. My usage has normalized since I took matters into my own hands." The evidence was irrefutable. Carol had been caught red-handed, stealing water and abusing her position of power. The room buzzed with condemnation. Mr. Henderson slammed his fist on the table. "I move that we immediately hold a vote of no confidence in Carol Vandergelt as president of this HOA." The motion was seconded instantly. The vote was swift and unanimous. Carol was stripped of her presidency. Her reign of terror, fueled by petty grievances and a thirst for control, had come to an abrupt and ignominious end. The board then moved on to the issue of water usage. Sarah proposed stricter, more equitable rules, including limitations on watering times and mandatory drought-resistant landscaping. The board, eager to distance themselves from Carol's mismanagement, readily agreed. Leaving the meeting, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, quickly followed by a surge of relief. She had faced down the HOA Karen and won. Justice, it seemed, could prevail, even in the most unlikely of arenas. A week later, Sarah sat on her porch, sipping iced tea. The sun shone brightly on her lush, green lawn. The new water restrictions were in place, ensuring fair usage for everyone in the community. She watched as a hummingbird zipped around her newly planted drought-resistant salvia, its vibrant colors a testament to the resilience of nature and the power of standing up for what was right. The sound of sprinklers echoed softly from a distance, a sound that no longer filled her with dread, but with a quiet sense of peace. Her little corner of the world, once besieged by petty tyranny, was finally at peace.